Okay. I tried this with music in the background. It didn't work, so I'm gonna try and start this again. It's interesting as you work on a sermon that you start out and you study through it and you get all sorts of ideas and all sorts of understandings of what this passage is really all about. But as you get to the point where you have to actually put a sermon together, you kind of have to come up with a focus. I think what we're going to focus on in this the message on our daily bread is really how everything that we have is a gift from God, and how God really urges us and wants us to consciously depend upon Him. I think a lot of times, well, I think all the time we are depending upon Him, but I don't think often we are conscious of our depending upon Him. As a matter of fact, I believe that a lot of times, if we want to experience God's uh, presence in our lives in a most powerful way, we need to really um, choose to put ourselves in a place of dependence. It's when I've had to be dependent upon the Lord, when I've experienced His kindness and His goodness and His presence the most. Um, Recently, I ordered a couple books from Amazon.com. For most of you who know me, that won't be a surprise. I tend to have quite a few books. As you can see from my last video, those are all my books in the background. Um, but I picked up a few books by my former wrestling coach, Steve Wolf, and in the beginning of his first book, Call Me Coach, I've read probably about 6 chapters so far. It's a pretty quick read, but as I read that first little bit, he talks about loading up his what sounds like a jalopy of a truck and driving up the Alcan to get to Alaska to get his first job and staying in a uh, what they called the stinking hole for the first year of living up in Alaska um, with his family. It's interesting as I think about this because, well, that story, if you've ever lived in Alaska, isn't all that unfamiliar. Um, there are a few people who can't come up to Alaska with quite a bit of money, but you'd be surprised how many people come up to and move to Alaska with just what they can fit in their car and what they can put on their back and come up there and make a life for themselves. As I was talking with Heidi about why people are so intrigued with Alaska, um, that's really one of the interesting parts of the Alaskan story is that people often come to Alaska with not much and through hard work and determination are able to make a life for themselves. And this is true of us. I was in between my eighth and ninth grade year. I actually got out of school early in eighth grade, and my mother and my sister and our dog and one of my mother's friends' sons and myself all packed into a Mazda GLC, a little bit smaller than a Honda Accord, packed what we could in that, and drove up to Alaska on the Alcan Highway um, in the promise of a job that was going to be there when we got there. Of course, the job that was promised didn't really pan out for us, and um, but we went out on a step of faith. Um, we went up praying with our church and with our pastor about whether God was really leading us to go up there in that direction after my mom graduated with her teaching degree. And God was. And now, 22 years later, almost after the fact, my mother is still living in Alaska, about to retire, with a full retirement from the school district, and um, owning our own home, and um, having lots of friends. And we moved up there with what we could fit in the trunk of and a car top carrier on a Mazda GLC compact car. Um, but it just goes to show, when you depend upon God like we had to at that time, is when we most experience His presence. The same was true um, the last time I came back from college for a summer. I was in between my junior and senior year, and I had to have a practicum in ministry, because I had a Christian education behavioral science double major. And I wanted to come back to Alaska, and so what I ended up doing is working with a mission organization to go out and into the bush of Alaska at a town called Stony River, which was right next, not too far from Sleet Mute, and right in between Aniak and McGrath on the Kuskokwim River. You could only fly in there or boat in there. Place I had a little electricity, but a pump for running water, and an outhouse, and no shower facilities or anything like that. So this is what I felt led to do, but it was scary. I didn't have a lot of money, um, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to pay for college the next year. I was also worried about having to raise support, both because I didn't want to ask, and because I didn't know if there was going to be enough support coming in to pay for me being in the program, much less the additional stipend to kind of give me some sort of compensation to go in to the next year with school. But I felt strongly led that's what I was supposed to do, and so I spent the money to do it, or I took the step to do it. Uh, but I really had to depend upon God to provide. And the amazing thing was, He did. Um, People supported me that I never thought would support me, including an ex fiance's mother. I ended up coming back to college and being able to go half time second semester of my senior year, and ended up actually having that be the least amount of money I had to take out in student loans to graduate. I ended up getting a scholarship to go to seminary the next year, where I really didn't have to pay anything for that either. Um, I ended up really blessed through the whole situation, and really growing, and um, realizing what things were needs and what things were wants. But I guess what I'm getting to, and I suppose I'm taking a while to get to this, is that when I had the strength and the courage and the willingness to acknowledge my dependence upon God, and to step out in a step of faith where I actually had to depend upon Him, that's when I felt close to God, and that's when I really sensed His presence. That's when I really knew that God was really blessing and working. And that's where I saw God at work most powerfully. So I wonder at times whether we need to work on having the courage, A, to acknowledge more of our dependence upon the Lord, and B, to uh, put ourselves have the faith and the courage to step out in faith and trust enough to where we have to depend upon Him. I don't know if that makes sense. If it does, I'd appreciate you listening to the video here and commenting back. That's kind of the direction my sermon's going. As you can see, it's still kind of rough, but maybe a little bit focused. with those 2 points than um, with the other things I talked through the week. God bless you. Take care.